It all started in 1939. The government announced that all men who were 21 years and older would be called up for a 6-month period. Little did we know at the time that those 6 months would actually stretch into 6 years. I was 21 in November 1939, and I received my call-up instructions like every other young man, but I was to report for service with the RAF at the Uxbridge depot. I took a course in supply work. By that time, of course, the bombing of London, or the Blitz, had begun. In fact, when I did manage to get home to London for a weekend, bombs were dropping every night. After training, I was told I was to be posted somewhere overseas. Initially, I was sent to Liverpool, where it was bombed 8 nights in a row. Then I was taken to Greenock, near Glasgow, where I boarded a troop ship called the Duchess of Richmond. It was part of a very large convoy. We learnt that some were headed for North Africa. However, for us, after several days, we landed in Sierra Leone to refuel. While we were there, planes from the Vichy flew over and they actually machine-gunned the convoy. Thankfully, the majority of the boats escaped and we headed south, round the Cape of Good Hope, and we arrived in Cape Town, where we camped for several days. We then boarded a Dutch liner called the Sibberjack, but still we didn't know where we were going. If we asked an officer where we were bound, he would say, "Destination unknown." A week or so later, we arrived in Singapore Harbour. I was put on a train which took me up through Malaya to Penang, where I boarded a cocktail ship. 5 days later, our destination at last became clear: Rangoon, Burma. We were allocated to work on administration at the Royal Air Force Headquarters 221 Group, which was situated in an office building in downtown Rangoon. We were put into a teakwood, horrible, bug-ridden barracks, and the food was disgusting. So we always welcomed the opportunity to get out of the barracks and enjoy some real food. One day, a friend of mine asked me to go with him to a dance, and there apparently I was to meet a young lady called Thelma.
As far as I was concerned, it was a nice country. I enjoyed myself while I was out there because I didn't know any different. I used to love going ballroom dancing. And in those days, if you went to the dances, you had to be dressed in long dresses and everything. Olive, who was my aunt, who was not much older than me, she wanted me to come with her to celebrate her birthday at the Male Marine ball. So she said to me, Reggie's got a friend, but he's a married man, but he can dance. I said, as long as he can dance, that's all I'm worried about. I'm not worried about whether he's married or he's single. So she said, all right. Anyway, it turned out that he couldn't make it. Okay. So they asked Gus to come. And Gus came in place of him. And that's how I met him. But I didn't know he was a single man. As far as I was concerned, he was just a man to dance with. And I enjoyed that. Anyway, we got talking and one thing and another, and he was talking about food that was so bad in the barracks that he was. So I said to him, well, why don't you hop over to our place? I said, you can always get a meal. So we always ended up with loads of service people coming in and eating in the house. As far as I was concerned, my life was lovely because I could enjoy myself, you see. Then I found out that he wasn't married. So he said to me, what gave you the idea that I was married? I said, well, because, I was told that the bloke who was coming to the dance was a married man. I said, and I just thought, well, I only wanted to go dancing, so that was the end of it. Anyway, he started coming over quite a lot and having his meals with us, and one thing and another. I took him to a port commissioner's dance one night, and of course we went because he played the piano. When the dance finished at 3 o'clock, he got on the piano, and another person got on the drums, and we were there till 6 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, we had a lot of people there. They didn't go home. They all stayed there. And then we went into what we call Mughal Street and had coffee and things like that. And then eventually we went and dropped him home at the barracks. And he had to sneak in from the back because it was so late.
The war in the East started when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. They then proceeded to attack and take over Singapore and Malaya. Burma had very few planes and had to rely on American volunteers to meet the attacks of the Japanese. A week before Christmas 1941, the Japanese bombed Rangoon and machine-gunned the city, causing terrible, terrible casualties. The Burmese, of course, had little protection from such an attack because their air raid shelters were just small trenches dug into their gardens. Once the air attack on Rangoon was complete, the Japanese, now in southern Burma, proceeded through the jungle to try and take Rangoon on foot.
Because the war hit us badly. And before we knew what happened, the Japs were coming in. And everybody was trying to get out of the country. But we had difficulty. Nobody knew what to do. Someone spoke to Mom and said to her, "You've got daughters, get out of this country before the Japs come." Because where we thought the Japs were coming in from China, they came in from Singapore side because they had taken over all that area, and they came through the jungles. And they came on elephants and attacked us in Burma. Everybody said they wouldn't get through, but they did, because it was all jungle there. But they came along. So we had to do something. So that all the ladies got together and said, well, let's get try and hire a small ship that'll take us to India. Yeah. But you were only allowed to take a small suitcase and a bedroll to sleep on. And where normally it would take 3 days to get across the bay to Calcutta, it took us 5 days because they coasted because of Jap submarines. We eventually got on the ship by running down to the docks, because every time you made an attempt to run, planes were coming over, there was nothing to stop them. And they were dropping their bombs. And eventually we managed to get on the ship and we left. And it was 1 day to get up the Hooghly River to get to Calcutta. I've never seen such a filthy river in all my life. Anyway, there was no such thing as cabins. So we had a piece on the deck, which was the hold, where they opened it up to put the stuff down below. So for 5 days and nights, I slept with my knees up and my head on my knees. You couldn't get water, you couldn't get a wash, you couldn't get anything unless you paid for it. Anyway, we got to Calcutta, and we eventually got off the boat. And we went into St. Xavier's College because they had a big hall, and they put us in there to stay. So our bedrolls came in handy again because you had to sleep on the floor. My father had to stay there and in Rangoon, and he had to walk from there. He walked to India. He managed to get a lift in someone's truck, and he got part of the way, and then they got stuck. So they started walking over what is called the Arakan Yumas. They're mountains. You go up and down. They had difficulty in as much as that they couldn't get any water going over these mountains, because every time they came to a pool, people who had walked for so long practically died on the spot. So nobody could drink that water. Anyway, they eventually managed to get out, my dad. And but he walked, but he was in a hell of a state by the time he arrived in India. And everybody kept on saying, oh, didn't you hear he died of cholera? And then someone else would say he died of so-and-so, and you know, because everybody was coming in and he wasn't coming in. But when he did arrive, he was so broken that he went to bed. He was in a terrible state, my dad, because he wasn't a young man. He was in his late 40s, coming up. So they moved to Gorakhpur, which was a nice place because it was right on the foot of the Nepalese hills and it was beautiful out there. But monkeys galore. I never wanted to see another monkey in all my life. And I saw so many monkeys in India. Do you know, going from Calcutta to Lucknow on the train, every time the train stopped at the station, you had to make sure that you checked your windows, because if you didn't, the monkeys were in. And nobody told us at the start, so we lost a lot of things. They were after the food, they even take your clothes out if they could, things like that. But honestly, from what we had to what we went down to was another thing. But we made the best of it.
The remaining RAF staff, including myself, were told to prepare to leave that night and proceed northwards. We had no idea of the hardship that lay ahead of us. We drove through the night, accompanied by only 3 lorries, 2 cars and 2 officers. We found an aerodrome called Magway. There was no accommodation or food, so we had to scavenge food wherever possible. A few days later, 7 of us were ordered to board a Blenheim light bomber, carrying only a rifle and some ammo. Our bags and our kit were thrown into the jungle. The plane landed 3 hours later in the Bay of Bengal, where we boarded a coastal steamer. Once again, we had no food, but we did find cups of tea during our 24-hour voyage to Calcutta. We were put into huts at Dum Dum Airport and at last given a meal. It had taken us weeks to get from Burma to India, during which I had lost about 2 stone in weight. Unfortunately for us, that wasn't the end of it. We were then put on a 2-day train journey to Fyzabad to some old barracks. The area was alive with monkeys, wild dogs, and the river was swarming with crocodiles. Many of us fell ill with dysentery, diarrhea, and other diseases.
In the meantime, I had joined the army, and I was in demand because I was a shorthand typist. But because I was a sergeant, I had to take the other girls on parade. And you've never seen Indian girls trying to march. They couldn't tell their left from their right. Talk about getting muddled with this. And in the heat of the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, trying to go on parade. In the end, I managed to get 2 long poles. And I got them on the ends, holding onto the poles. And I would say left, right, and they moved with that. Holding onto poles, because otherwise you got them going all over the place. Because when the officer came to see what I was doing, he said to me, "Where'd you get that idea from?" I said, "Well, they're idiots. They can't tell left from right, you know, Indian girls." So, and the places we were living in were terrible. You didn't even have a proper kitchen. Not that I did any cooking, because I couldn't cook. I couldn't boil water, leave alone anything else. Honestly, India was a place God started and forgot to finish. That's the only way you can describe India. It was terrible.
At Faizabad, we were kitted out with new clothes. Thelma had given me the address of her uncle in Lucknow. So I applied for leave, boarded a local rickshaw, and made my way to the house, hoping that Thelma would still be alive.
Then suddenly one day we had a knock at the door. And I opened the door to see Gus standing there. So, what are you doing here? I said, did you get all my letters? I was writing letters, but I wasn't getting anything from him. I said, where's your ukulele? I gave it to you before you left. He said, they told me I wasn't going on a band, so they threw it over the fence. He said, I just came in the things I was standing in, because that was the only thing they could do. And we decided to get married.
How did he propose?
In a letter.
How much time had passed? How long had you been without each other?
I left on the 2nd of February, 1942. And I met up with Gus again. Must have been nearly towards Christmas. In the meantime, there was another young fella that was wanting to marry me, and I didn't want to marry him. But my mother was determined I should marry him. His name was Cyril Hubert. What a name. He was a nice enough guy, but I didn't love him. There was only one person in my mind, and that was Gus, even though I hadn't seen him. And in the end, my mother made all the arrangements to get married. It involved a lot of people. I felt very sorry afterwards. Because of the work my mother was doing, we had the commissioners and this one and that one, all the top people who supplied me with a hall for nothing. I had all the checks that came in. I had the flowers were all given to me for the church as well as for the hall and everything like that. I was booked to get on a plane once I got into barracks to come to England. All this was all done, and I went and said to her on the Sunday, I was getting married on the Wednesday, I'm sorry, Mum, I can't marry him. So of course you know what happened. Big hullabaloo in the house. I ran away from the home, slipped across to my grandmother's and stayed there. And then eventually Gus and I started getting together again. And he said to me, do you still want to marry me? I said, yes. I told Mum, I said, I'm going to get married in the March. I said, whether you like it or not, I'm going to get married. Then started the rush to get material to make a wedding dress and things like that. They gave me the best wedding I could ever afford in wartime. We were right out at the foot of the mountains. It was beautiful then, but for the monkeys. Monkeys galore. They were about that high, and they used to have white faces. And they used to get onto the fence, and they'd shake the fence like that. I went straight up to where Gus was in the hills. But it took me 3 days to get there. That's how big India is. And then when you got to Lahore, we had to get on a truck and go round and round the mountains, 7,000 feet up. And I was glad to get there because I thought I'd be sick.
Sometime later, Thelma fell pregnant and had our first son, Adrian, named after his granddad. And a year later, our second son, Peter, was born.
I think on the whole, I've had a very good life.
It sounds like it.
We stuck together through thick and thin. I came home on a boat. It took me 28 days to get here. And we landed in Glasgow. And then we had to find trains to come down to London. And we didn't know where his parents were living. We were asking on the buses how to get there. And eventually we found the place. But he was still in the Air Force. He had to stay on there. They kept asking him to stay on. And he said, no, I can't get quarters, so I have to give up. And eventually, because I only used to see him at weekends if I was lucky. And eventually he came home.
When settled in England, we then had our third child and only daughter, Julia.
Was he a good dancer then?
No. No, because he spent all his life on the piano.
Right.
Well done, Shannon.